Okay. Next type of molecule we're going to talk about are proteins. And so of these 4 types of molecules that we are talking about, which one makes up over half the biomass of most living things? Well, it would be dumb if it was anything but a protein, right? But I say this because I want to, express to you the importance of proteins. Again, you're familiar with protein. You know lots of foods are high in protein, and you talk about protein in your diet and things like that. But you got to realize that, why proteins are important in your diet and why proteins are important, because, most of your biomass is protein. Most biomass, over half of the biomass of most living things is protein. Proteins make, everything in biology, but there's so much more. Proteins are so much more important. They do so much. And as we go through the semester, you'll find that proteins have lots of different functions, and they're very complex. And they're incredibly important molecules. And so, they can be structural. They can be something that like builds you, right? So hair, skin, fingernails, that's all protein. But they can be, they can also make muscle, right? And they can be important for muscles are made of protein, and of course muscles are important for biological function. Proteins make enzymes, and we'll see that enzymes are critical to the function of living things. Enzymes help other chemical reactions take place, and these enzymes are made of protein. Proteins can be used to store energy. That's why eggs have lots of protein. There's just your immune system, your antibodies. Your antibodies are protein. Proteins are incredibly diverse. They do everything, and so we will talk a lot about proteins in here. So what is a protein? How do we build a protein? Proteins are made by linking together amino acids. And so amino acid, that might be a term that you've heard before. Amino acid is the building block of a protein. So like we took simple sugars, and those were the monomers that we used to build complex carbohydrates. And then in fats, we had like fatty acids and glycerol. Those were the monomers that we put together to make a fat. In proteins, it's amino acids that we put together to make a protein. And so here's all the amino acids that humans need, that biological organisms need. And so you don't have to like memorize these or anything, but just take a look at them, and you see that they all have one thing in common, that kind of grayish, purplish bar, shaded area, that's common for all of them. And then the other part of the molecule is what's different between different amino acids. And you might recognize the names of some of these. You see tryptophan on there, right? Everyone's familiar with tryptophan, and there's a lot of tryptophan in turkey, and so that's why you get so sleepy on Thanksgiving, because tryptophan makes you sleepy, and there's lots of it, and this is tryptophan's amino acid. Here's the thing, that's all not true. None of that is true, right? Tryptophan doesn't make you sleepy. Turkey does not have higher levels of tryptophan than anything else. That's all just nonsense. The reason you get sleepy at Thanksgiving is because you eat a giant meal, right? And anytime you eat a giant meal, that makes you sleepy. Anyway, so you can take and you can build any protein that you need from these 20 amino acids. And so the metaphor, the analogy is like, you can make any word in the English language by combining the 26 letters of the alphabet together in different ways. In the same way, you can make any protein you need by combining these 20 amino acids together in any way that you need. And so when you put those amino acids together, one of the things that's interesting is it's just in a long string. It's just the amino acids just holding hands in a long string. And so what I mean is they're not branching. It's not like an amino acid kind of goes here and one goes here and one goes out that way. No, they just go in a long string, one after another, one amino acid after another, right? But when you get that long string of amino acids and the order of amino acids is critical, that string starts to wrap up and fold up into a very complicated 3D structure. And one of the ideas that I'm going to, again, beat to death in this class is that shape is critical to proteins. And so that three-dimensional shape is super important to the function of that protein. And so if you change, so these proteins are very big. And so again, we're talking hundreds of amino acids, maybe thousands of amino acids in one long chain, and then they all wrap up, like you took a cord, you just wrapped it up into a very complicated shape, and that shape is critical to the protein. But if you change a single amino acid, you might change the shape of that protein, and then the protein might not work. Sometimes you can just change an amino acid or two and the protein works fine. But sometimes you change a single amino acid and you get a completely different protein. And so that's going to be real important throughout the semester. The bottom line is proteins are big. They're what we call macromolecules. They're large molecules. They're very diverse. And so there's just a huge number of these different shapes and different amino acid structures. And they do lots of different things. So there's a diversity in what they do for living things. And they're incredibly important. And the shape of the proteins is critical to their function. Change the shape and the protein usually won't work if you change the shape. And so we can represent the shape of proteins in several different ways, but none of them are sufficient. But you can see what they're trying to show you here is they're trying to emphasize the three-dimensional nature of proteins and the fact that it's a long cord that's wrapped up in a funky way. Now, if you zoomed in on that, any part of that, you would see that cord is made of amino acids. And it's just these 20. There's only 20 of them, but they're arranged in a particular way and they're holding hands, and that's how you make a protein. And so then here's an example again of how shape is so critical to function. And so you got a computer model here of an antibody protein on the left and a flu virus protein on the right. And so this is how your antibodies work in your immune system. They're proteins with a funky shape. And somewhere in your blood, there is an antibody that shape is the same as the protein on the virus. And since it's the same shape, they can match up. And when that antibody can match up, then that triggers your immune system to start attacking that particular virus. And so this is how vaccines work. You get these antibodies that have a particular shape for a particular virus, and you mass produce them, and then you inject them into people. And so then when they get the virus, the antibody's already there that matches that protein on the virus, and so the antibodies bind to the virus and start your immune system right away. And so, of course, this is the same thing that we're trying to achieve with the COVID virus. And so the COVID virus has got these proteins on its surface, and we need antibodies that match that protein, and so then can mark the virus for our immune system to attack. But that takes a while. It takes a while when you're exposed to the virus for that match to be found, and then for your body to make copies of that matching antibody. And in the meantime, you get very, very sick. And so the idea behind developing a vaccine is to develop something that will stimulate this antibody production in your body before you get the virus. And so then when you get the virus, you've got the matching protein, and so your immune system can immediately attack it and you don't get sick. That's what we're shooting for. Again, the point is it's all about the shape. The shape of the protein on the surface of the virus and the shape of your antibody must match for them to bind and for your immune system to attack. Here's a hemoglobin, and you're probably familiar with hemoglobin, which is in your blood, and it's a big, complicated protein. And this helps to carry oxygen in your blood. And again, you can see the very complicated shape here that's important to the function of the hemoglobin. And if you get a change in a single amino acid, you can change the shape of this protein. And you change the shape of this protein in such a way that it, under certain conditions, it can start to form, cause the red blood cells to form these sickle shapes, and that's what sickle cell anemia is. And it's just a single amino acid change that can change the shape, that can cause your red blood cells to have that abnormal shape. So again, here's your figure from your book, showing the concept of amino acids, and these amino acids being linked together to form a long string, and then the string wrapping up into a unique three-dimensional shape. And again, I told you I'm going to beat you over the head with this. You change the shape of a protein and it won't work, or it works differently. And a small change in the amino acids can cause a misshapen protein. So again, small change, big difference. And this isn't always a bad thing. This is how we get new characteristics. And so different traits are usually due to different proteins. So for example, blue eyes versus brown eyes. You're just producing a different type of protein, which either produces a pigment or doesn't produce a pigment. And so the difference in eye color is due to different proteins. Yellow flowers versus white flowers, same thing. That protein that produces a pigment or doesn't produce a pigment. So one produces a pigment, has yellow flowers, the other doesn't produce a pigment, you got white flowers. It's a different shaped protein. Just about everything. Just like all the differences you see and all the diversity you see in biology is because of different proteins doing different things. And why is that? Well, because DNA makes RNA, makes protein. So I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here. But DNA, your genes, you're familiar with your genes and your chromosomes control the traits and the characteristics that you have. Well, how do they do that? Well, DNA makes a molecule called RNA, and RNA makes protein. And so the different genes you have make different proteins, which give you different traits. And then how, what's different about these proteins? They have a different shape. And so this is the big picture, how the shape is so important to the function of proteins. And lots of diseases are due to misshapen proteins. And so things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, mad cow disease, these are all associated with misfolded proteins. And so this is what's exciting about biology and medicine now, is we can we're trying to unlock the shape of these proteins and understand how that change in shape causes this disease. And so then you can start to figure out, well, what can we do to avoid this disease or reverse this disease? Sickle cell anemia, again, a change, one amino acid changes the shape of the hemoglobin, which causes the red blood cells to sickle up. But it also gives an advantage. Somebody who's a carrier of the sickle cell allele is less likely to get malaria. And when we talk about evolution, we'll talk about that. So again, changing the shape is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing. It just depends on the context. And there's just lots of other examples. There's just lots of ways we can talk about the shape of protein being critical to the function of the protein, and that's how you can explain lots of diseases. Okay, so now the last group that we need to talk about are nucleic acids. And we've already kind of hinted at those and talked about those. There's only two. Deoxyribonucleic acid, which is DNA, so that's what DNA stands for, and ribonucleic acid, which is RNA. We just talked about DNA makes RNA, makes protein, and we'll talk about that in a lot more detail. But you're familiar with your chromosomes and genes, and those are made of DNA. That's what the type of molecule that they're made of. Now, unlike the other types of molecules we talked about, you don't really talk about DNA as part of your nutrition, right? Like everything you eat's got DNA in it, but it's not something that is an important part of your diet. So, but it is incredibly important to living things. And just like protein, we said protein was just a long string, and the protein formed up into a crazy three-dimensional shape. DNA and RNA are both long strings as well, but they don't coil up into a crazy shape like protein does. Now, DNA is a double-stranded molecule. It's a long string, and it can twist into coils and wrap up, and that's how you can pack it into a small space. But it doesn't have the three-dimensional shape like a protein does. Now, if you zoom way in on that long strand of DNA, you'll see that it looks like a ladder that's been twisted, and that's the double helix. So you're probably familiar with the idea that the DNA is a double helix. Well, this is what they're talking about. Here's a picture of it. Here's a figure from your book showing the same thing. And so you've got two strands that are joined together to make DNA. And so if you can imagine, again, take a ladder, grab it at each end, and just twist it, and that's what a double helix looks like. And if you zoom in on that double helix, you can see the two strands, and the strands are made of what we call nucleotides, and the nucleotides bind together. And we're going to go into a lot of detail about how this works when we talk about genetics. But you hear these terms a lot, and you're familiar with them. You understand that there's DNA and chromosomes and genes, but it's very important that you understand exactly the definition of each of these. And so we, in biology, we want to be very precise about what these are. So DNA is a type of molecule. A long strand of DNA inside a cell is called a chromosome. One strand of DNA inside a cell is called a chromosome. And the chromosome has genes on it. So one chromosome has many genes on it, and that chromosome is made of DNA, and thus the genes are made of DNA, because a gene is a part of a chromosome. So you need to kind of make sure you keep these all straight in your brain. Here's a picture kind of showing you, again, a very long piece of DNA that has lots of genes that's in a cell. That's a chromosome. And so a piece of this chromosome is called a gene. And then the whole thing is made of DNA, which is a type of molecule. Okay, so you might know this. How many chromosomes do humans have? And our chromosomes exist in pairs, and we've got 23 pairs, so 46 total. And so that's in each and every cell in your body. Now that's fascinating, because your body is made of trillions of cells, right? Just a ridiculous number of cells. And every one of them has 46 chromosomes. And every one of them has the exact same 46 chromosomes. And so again, that's pretty amazing, right? It's like every cell in your body, no matter where it is, in your toe, in your ear, in your stomach, it's got the exact same full complement of DNA. But that DNA is different from every other human being's DNA on the planet. That's pretty cool. Okay, so we said that each of those chromosomes has a bunch of genes on it. So about how many genes do you think humans have? Well, a good estimate is about 25,000 genes. And so, I don't know if that is amazing to you or not, but that's about how many genes we have. Now, the interesting question is, how does that compare to other organisms? And so here's some other organisms and humans. Which has the most genes, do you think? And so a water flea, Daphnia, these are little, they're about a 0.5 millimeter long. And so if you took a scoop of water from Kentucky Lake and you looked at it, you'd see these hopping around. So they're about that size. Chicken, you know what a chicken is. E. coli bacteria are very small, 2 microns, and so you can't really see those without an electron microscope in humans. So of all these organisms, which do you think has the most genes? The answer actually is the water flea. So Daphnia pulex has the most genes of any organism, 31,000. Just crazy, right? Chickens about 17,000, E. coli about 4,000. We say humans have about 25,000. And that's something you talk about in genetics, kind of the paradox that there doesn't seem to be a close relationship between the number of genes and the amount of DNA and like the size of the organism, or how long the organism has or how long it's evolved, or how much it's evolved, or anything like that. So that's just kind of interesting. But it's very interesting that such a small organism as a water flea has more genes than anything. That's crazy. Okay, so in each of your cells, you've got all your DNA. And so if all those 46 chromosomes were stretched out and laid end to end, about how long do you think it would be? 2 microns, 2 millimeters, 2 meters, or 2 kilometers. So this is also a good way for you to practice your metric system. And so every one of your cells, if you took all the chromosomes and stretched them out, they'd be about 2 meters long. So I'm about 2 meters tall, right? And so, again, in every cell, you've got 2 meters of DNA. And cells are small. So how do you get 2 meters of DNA in each and every one of your cells? Well, like I said, DNA is incredibly thin. And so it's very thin, and it can coil up and wrap up, and you can pack it down into a very little package, and it fits into the nucleus of the cell. So, again, that's pretty cool. Okay. And so we said that every chromosome has several genes on it. Well, what exactly is a gene? A gene is a piece of the chromosome that has instructions for making RNA. And so you've got, only 2 nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. And DNA makes the RNA. But it's not just any old part of the chromosome. It's a specific part. And so wherever you've got a piece of that chromosome that has the instructions for RNA, that's what a gene is. So again, you're familiar with this concept of, genes, and genes control traits, and but this is exactly what a gene is. It has the instructions for making RNA. But then the RNA has instructions for making proteins. And we said this. We said DNA makes RNA makes protein. I said that earlier. And so now you see the importance not only of the proteins but of the DNA, and you see how the DNA ultimately controls everything in the cell. So the DNA has the base instructions, and those instructions in the genes are used to make RNA. And then the RNA goes out and then takes the instructions that come from the DNA and uses those instructions to make protein. And then we said proteins are incredibly diverse, right? Proteins do all kinds of things. And so you make these proteins, and that's how those proteins go do things for the organism. So that's how DNA controls the whole organism, by making RNA, which makes protein. And so this is the mantra that I want you to chant, and I want you to meditate on this every night. So when you go to bed tonight, I want you to say to yourself, DNA makes RNA, makes protein. DNA makes RNA, makes protein. It's very relaxing, and it's good to know, because it's a very important concept, and we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail. But this is how the nucleic acids and the proteins are all related to one another. Okay. And so that was our 4 types of biological molecules, and we went to a little detail about each one. And it's important that you're able to recognize them when you see them. It's important that you understand the structure and the function of each of these. And so then, as we talk about them the rest of the semester, it'll make a lot more sense. And again, you might be asking yourself, hey, this is a biology class. Why are we talking so much about chemistry? Like I said, everything is chemistry. And if you want to understand biology, you've got to understand it at sort of the molecular, cellular level. That's the place to start. and then you can build upon that to understand bigger things in biology. So that's what I got. Please let me know if you've got any questions, and I will see you later.